Hi, boys and girls. Okay, we are going to do our Bible lesson for today. The last time we talked about how Jesus and his disciples were getting ready to head to the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, so this is where we're picking up. Okay, so they had gone to the garden, and remember, Jesus had shared so much with them about what was happening. They had enjoyed the Last Supper together, and there was a lot of silence among the group. Okay, you could hear the wind through the olive trees, and they were tired and they were weary because it was actually getting kind of late. And Jesus had told them to sit down and wait because he was going to go on ahead and pray. Well, most of them waited, but he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he walked some yards away from the others, and he was sad and sorrowful and troubled because he knew what was coming up. He knew that the time of his suffering and his death for the sins of the world was there, and he shared with his disciples that were with those three that were with him that his soul was crushed with sorrow, and he asked them to stay there and stay awake with him. And he just wanted the comfort of these three disciples close to him. And then Jesus goes on forward a little bit farther and he falls to the ground. And knowing what was to come, his suffering that was going to be so great seemed for a moment like it was almost impossible to bear. Because even though he was God, he was going through that same human suffering that we feel as he became our substitute for sin. Okay, and he prays, to God the Father that if it's possible to let that suffering be taken away from him. But then he said, you know what, Father, your will to be done and not mine. Okay, and he was just it was overwhelming knowing what all he was going to have to go through physically. But y'all, it was something he was willing to do because of his love for us. Okay, but there was no other way for God to redeem sinful men, and Jesus knew that before the world was created. He knew that this was part of what was going to be part of history. This was going to be part of what happened during his lifetime, and he had willingly, we talked about this the other day, he willingly left heaven and left his Father's side to come down to earth to be that perfect lamb to be sacrificed for us. So after some time in prayer, he returns to Peter, James, and John, and guess what? He found them asleep. So he calls out to them, couldn't you even stay awake with me for an hour? Because they should have been there to give comfort and strength and help and prayers, but they'd gone to sleep. Well, he leaves them again and he prays again, and he goes back again and he finds them sleeping again. All right. So he goes back and he prays a third time. And his heart was so broken that scripture tells us that his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. But then something great happens. His Father sends an angel from heaven to strengthen him. So at last he rises up from the ground and he goes back once more. And he finds Peter, James, and John huddled together, still snoozing. But he tells them to wake up. He said, here comes a great crowd to get me. Get up, let's be going. So the sleepy disciples get up and they rub their eyes and they're just, what's the matter? They're just mumbling, trying to figure out what's going on. And Jesus tells them, look, here comes the one who is going to betray me. Remember, they had talked about that at the Last Supper. We talked about that with the last lesson that we had. And through the garden comes this big mob with torches and lanterns and sticks and clubs and all kind of stuff. And they had been sent by those Jewish religious leaders. And who is leading this crowd other than Judas Iscariot? Okay, because remember, he had told the leaders that he would take them to where Jesus was. He would show them where they needed to go for the pieces of silver. And he had also told them that he was going to give them a sign. He said, the one that I go up and kiss, that is the one you're after. That will be Jesus. So the crowd gets together and Judas steps up to Jesus and kisses him and embraces him, acting all friendly and says, greetings, Master. Well, Jesus knew why Judas had kissed him. So he asked, he said, friend, why are you here? Are you going to betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And Jesus turns to the crowd and he asks, for whom are you looking? And they answer that they're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he replies that I am he, is what he replies. So when he said this, the crowd drew back and fell to the ground like dead men. They were terrified because they were in the presence of God. And finally, some of the people staggered to their feet and came up to Jesus and grabbed him. And Peter was so upset over all of this that he drew his sword and he cut off the right ear of one of the men, one of the servants of the high priest. And Jesus commands him, put that sword away. Okay, for all they take with the sword, all that take with the sword shall also perish with the sword. So Jesus stoops down, he picks up the guy's ear, and he puts it back on his head, good as new. So here is just another example that Jesus sets for us of his lovingness, his kindness, even to his enemies, even when they were taking him away to be a prisoner. So Jesus told the men, he says, you're not capturing me. Don't you realize, I could ask my Father for thousands of angels and he would send them instantly. I'm going to let you take me because this is why I came from heaven. So go ahead and do with me as you please. So they took him as a prisoner and they led him away. And the disciples were just left paralyzed with fear, and they kind of scattered in all directions, and they forsook him and they fled, just like they talked about at the Last Supper. Well, later, after it was too late, Jesus took that money back to the priest and the scribes, and he said to them, I have betrayed innocent blood, but they wouldn't take his money because to them that was blood money. And scripture tells us that Jesus threw it down on the temple, Judas threw it down on the temple floor, and he went out and he got a rope and he hung himself. And this is a very dreadful, tragic end for somebody who had had every chance to be saved. Okay. And the rulers, scripture tells us that money he had thrown down, they took it and they bought a plot of land, and they used that plot of land for poor people to be buried in. Okay. So here's the thing. Just as Jesus looks into our hearts today, we need to ask ourselves, does he see some of us as hypocrites like Judas was, acting like we love him, but we don't really mean what we say, and outwardly we act one way, but that's not how we feel on the inside? Because it's possible, guys, to go to church and Sunday school and try to be good and kind and outwardly to pray and do the things that we're supposed to do and not cheat or use ugly words or anything like that, but still not truly let our hearts belong to the Lord. Okay. And of course, he wants us to do all of those things where we act like we're supposed to and we do what we're supposed to do. But guys, he wants all of us. He wants our whole heart. So that's something to ponder and think about. Is your life truly in the Father's hands? Do you have a relationship with him? Okay. So our next lesson, we're going to talk about what happens as Jesus is taken prisoner.